it would transport somebody between Anaheim and between LA and San Francisco in about 2.5 hours. It would cost, at this point at least, about $105 a round trip, which isn't bad, and that the estimate is that about 120,000 passengers daily would do this. You don't think that there'll be that many passengers, or where does your skepticism come when you think of those?
It comes from, we've got a lot of high-speed rail in the world right now. We know roughly how people use it, and we know how Americans differ from the Chinese. I mean, in Europe and in Asia, inner city travel has always been by rail. They have a tenth the car ownership we have. It's fractional. And yet those train systems are losing market share. In Europe, the growth in driving between cities is much, much higher than the growth. In fact, the high-speed rail system's losing market share there in Europe, where it's somewhat worked over the years. In the US, we don't ride the trains. We travel by cheap air travel, and we drive. And so the train has to be a fantastically better deal to get people to ride it, and it isn't a fantastically better deal.
Yeah, that's what I thought. 2.5 hours, 105. Well, Southwest is whatever, 130, 2.5 hours. Pretty close to what I could fly up to Oakland for. So why would I want to jump on this train?
Well, I think you'll find, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Well, I mean, I just think 2.5 hours, if you look at how much time it takes to call up Super Shuttle, get Super Shuttle to come, you get to the airport, you wait in the airport for hours, you wait in lines, you get through security, you wait for the plane to come to the door, and then you sit in those tiny little seats with your legs up like this. I mean, I think...
Don't forget the pretzels.
And
those fabulous pretzels, it's true. But so I just think that people would be willing to... I personally, I mean, like, I love riding Amtrak, which is not very easy to do because there isn't that much service, but I just think that for a higher quality ride and a higher quality travel experience, 2.5 hours might, it's probably comparable too if you consider how difficult it is to get to the airport and to get from the airport.
Adrian's shaking his head.
Well, you look at our own history. We had inner city train travel before the car became ubiquitous. I'm talking pre-World War II. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, as cars became available before World War II, through the Great Depression, after World War II, remember what those cars were like until they really got nice in the 50s. I mean, this is not a better ride than the train. The train was much faster, and the train was vastly cheaper. It cost 4 or 5 times as much to drive as it did to ride the train. The train was faster, and it was much more comfortable, and yet people left the trains. In 20 years, there was no one riding the trains anymore. It was done. They all went to cars because even in spite of all of that, it was a vastly superior travel experience. And so the idea that this train is going to get everybody right, sure, people will ride it, but nowhere near the numbers you need to make it viable in this very undense corridor of up and down the state of California. Okay. It's just not going to work.
Any final thoughts before we switch to something more local?
Well, just as Gloria said, I think one, we need to do as much as we can to end our dependence on foreign oil. That's just, I mean, that's a national security issue, and frankly ought to be viewed as a greater national security issue than it is. It's not just a transportation issue. So I think that's part of the motivation. I also think people are looking for alternatives. You look at the growth projected in California, and the roads that are congested today are going to be much more congested in the future. People will look to alternatives. We intend to provide an alternative, but we have to do it in a way that makes sense. We have to do it in a way that's cost effective. We have to do it in a manner that is appealing to the public, or they won't use it. So that's the task and the challenge before the commission.
Gloria, any thoughts?
Also, I mean, I think it's important that there is a redundancy in transportation systems.
Yes.
That sounds like a bad word, but if you look at what happened with Hurricane Katrina, or you look at what happened after 9/11 when people were desperately trying to get out of the cities and there was no way to get out, it would be, I think it's important also for national security reasons to have, not just one mode of transportation, but 2 modes of transportation.